A 75-year-old man was thrown out into a deadly snowstorm by his own son-in-law. No coat, no phone, just betrayal. But what no one knew was that this moment would create a man who would later save hundreds of lives and destroy the man who tried to erase him. Arthur Bennett was 75 years old the night everything he believed about family quietly collapsed. The house was warm, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Outside, snow fell in thick, relentless sheets, piling against the windows like the world was trying to seal them in. The news on the television murmured about rising cases, lockdowns, and fear. The pandemic had turned the world cold long before the storm arrived. But inside that living room, something colder was already growing. Arthur sat in his usual chair by the window, hands folded over a worn wool blanket. His fingers trembled slightly, not just from age, but from something deeper. A tension he didn't understand. From the kitchen, voices cut through the quiet. "You're telling me it just disappeared?" his son-in-law snapped. "I didn't touch it," Arthur said gently, raising his voice just enough to be heard. "I haven't even been in your office." There was a pause, then a laugh, sharp, humorless. "Right? Of course you didn't." The man stepped into the living room, phone in hand, jaw tight. His name was Mark, and everything about him felt controlled, except now. Now there was something dangerous in his eyes. "The money's gone, Arthur. $5,000. Just gone." Arthur blinked slowly. That's not possible." "Funny," Mark shot back. "Because the only person in this house all day was you." The words hung in the air like smoke. Arthur's daughter, Emily, stood just behind Mark. Her arms were crossed, her face pale, her eyes uncertain, but not defending him. That hurt more than the accusation. "Emily," Arthur said softly, turning toward her. "You know me." She hesitated, and in that hesitation, something inside Arthur cracked. I don't know what to think right now," she whispered. The room felt smaller. Arthur pushed himself up from the chair, his knees stiff, his heart heavier than it had ever been. "I raised you," he said quietly. "I spent my whole life making sure you were safe, that you had everything you needed. You think I'd steal from you?" Mark scoffed. "People get desperate, especially these days." Arthur stared at him. "I am not desperate." "No." Mark stepped closer. "Then explain it." "I can't explain something that didn't happen." "Convenient." Emily looked away. And just like that, Arthur understood. This wasn't about truth anymore. It was about belief. And he was losing. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows violently, as if the storm itself was trying to break in. Mark exhaled sharply, then made a decision. "That's it. I'm not doing this." He pointed toward the door. "You need to leave." Arthur didn't move. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me." Mark's voice was flat now. "Final. Until we figure this out, I'm not letting a thief stay in my house." "This isn't your house," Arthur said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Mark's expression hardened. "It is now." Silence. Emily stepped forward slightly. "Dad, maybe it's just for a few days. Until things calm down." Arthur turned to her slowly. "A few days," he repeated. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't step closer. "You want me to go out there?" he asked, nodding toward the storm raging beyond the glass. "It's not safe for any of us right now," Mark interrupted, "especially with everything going on." Arthur let out a quiet, breathless laugh. "Not safe," he murmured. "Right." For 75 years, he had believed that home was a place you built with love. That family meant something unbreakable. But now, standing there in that living room, watching his daughter avoid his eyes while another man decided his fate, he realized how fragile everything really was. "I don't have anywhere to go," he said. Mark walked to the door and opened it. The wind exploded into the house, carrying snow and ice and a brutal, biting cold that stole the breath from Arthur's lungs. "Then you should have thought about that before," Mark replied. Arthur looked at Emily one last time. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't stop it, and that silence was louder than anything. Slowly, Arthur reached for his coat, but Mark grabbed it first and tossed it aside. "No," he said. "You leave. Now." Arthur hesitated, his body frozen between disbelief and reality. Then, with nothing but the clothes on his back and 75 years of memories collapsing behind him, he stepped into the storm. The door slammed shut. And just like that, Arthur Bennett was no longer a father. He was a man alone in the cold, with nowhere left to belong. The cold didn't just hit Arthur Bennett, it attacked him. The moment the door slammed behind him, the warmth of the house vanished like it had never existed. The wind tore through his thin clothes, sharp as broken glass, slicing into his skin. Snow whipped across his face, blinding him, choking him, stealing the air from his lungs. For a second, he just stood there, 75 years old, and suddenly nowhere to go. "Emily," he whispered, turning back instinctively. But the door didn't open. No footsteps. No voice calling him back. Nothing. Only the storm. Arthur swallowed hard, his throat tightening as the reality settled in. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't temporary. They had chosen this. He pulled his arms tighter around himself and stepped off the porch, his shoes sinking into the thick, unforgiving snow. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the world itself was trying to drag him down. The street was nearly invisible, buried under white. Streetlights flickered in the distance, casting weak halos through the swirling storm. The pandemic had emptied the neighborhood. No cars, no people, no help, just silence and wind. Arthur tried to think. Where could he go? A neighbor? No, they barely spoke. A hotel? He didn't have his wallet. A friend? Most of them were gone now, or just as old and vulnerable as he was. His chest tightened. "I'll figure something out," he muttered, more to convince himself than anything else. He started walking. One step, then another. The cold seeped deeper with every second, crawling through his clothes, settling into his bones. His fingers began to stiffen, then ache, then slowly go numb. His breath came out in uneven bursts, visible in the freezing air. "Just keep moving," he whispered. But the storm didn't care. A gust of wind slammed into him, nearly knocking him off his feet. He stumbled, catching himself on a snow-covered mailbox. His legs trembled beneath him, not just from the cold, but from exhaustion. He hadn't felt this weak in years. Another step, then another. But something was changing. The world around him started to blur, not just from the snow, but from inside his own mind. Sounds became distant. The wind, once violent, now felt muffled, almost quiet. Dangerously quiet. Arthur blinked slowly. His thoughts drifted. For a moment, he wasn't in the storm anymore. He was back in a different winter, decades ago, holding a much smaller hand. Emily's hand. She couldn't have been more than 6, bundled in a bright red coat, laughing as she tried to catch snowflakes on her tongue. "Careful, sweetheart," he had said, smiling. "You'll freeze out here." "I won't. You're here." Her voice echoed in his mind, clear, warm, alive. Arthur's lips trembled. "I'm still here," he murmured. But when he looked up, there was no little girl. No laughter. Just darkness and snow. His knees buckled. He dropped to one leg, the cold biting instantly through his clothes. He tried to push himself back up, but his body didn't respond the way it used to. "Come on," he whispered, frustration creeping in. "Get up." Nothing. His fingers barely moved. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The truth crept in slowly, but unmistakably. He wasn't just cold. He was losing. Arthur leaned against a buried curb, his breathing shallow now. Each inhale burned, each exhale weaker than the last. And then came the most dangerous feeling of all. Warmth. It spread through his chest, soft and comforting, like slipping into a warm bed after a long day. The pain dulled. The fear faded. His eyelids grew heavy. "This isn't so bad," he whispered. That was the moment. The moment people don't come back from. Snow began to settle on his shoulders, then his hair, then his face. The storm slowly started to cover him, like the world was erasing him piece by piece. Arthur's head tilted back slightly. His eyes closed. And for the first time since the door slammed behind him, he stopped fighting. A faint sound cut through the storm. Distant at first, then louder. A siren. Red and blue lights flickered weakly through the snow, dancing across the white-covered street. The vehicle slowed. Stopped. A door opened. "Hey, hey." Boots crunched through the snow, fast, urgent. A figure rushed toward him, kneeling beside his frozen body. "Sir, can you hear me?" Arthur didn't respond. The officer's voice tightened. "Dispatch. I've got a man down. Severe exposure, unresponsive. I need EMS now." A gloved hand pressed gently against Arthur's neck. "Come on, stay with me," the officer muttered. Arthur's eyes flickered. Just barely. A weak breath escaped his lips. And in that fragile, fading moment, between life and something else, someone had found him. Just in time. Darkness didn't feel like darkness. It felt quiet. Arthur Bennett floated somewhere between sleep and nothingness, where time didn't exist and pain couldn't reach him. The storm, the cold, the betrayal, it all drifted away like a distant memory. For a moment, it was peaceful. Too peaceful. Then came the noise. "Sir, stay with me. Can you hear me?" The voice cut through the silence like a crack in glass. Arthur's mind stirred. Something tugged at him. Hard, urgent, refusing to let him drift any deeper. A sharp pressure hit his chest. "Come on. Breathe." Air forced its way into his lungs, burning like fire. His body jerked violently, coughing, choking as the cold rushed back in all at once. Pain returned. So did the world. Arthur's eyes snapped open. Blinding lights flooded his vision. White, harsh, overwhelming. Shapes moved above him, blurred and frantic. Voices overlapped, fast and tense. He's coming back. Pulses weak, but there. Let's get him loaded now. Hands gripped him, lifting, turning, securing. The cold bit into his skin one last time before something warmer wrapped around him. A blanket. Rough, thin, but warmer than death. Arthur tried to speak, but his lips barely moved. I. Don't talk. A voice said firmly, closer now. Steady. Grounded. You're safe. I've got you. Arthur turned his head slightly. The face above him came into focus. Dark eyes, focused and alert beneath a layer of snow and frost. The same man who had pulled him from the street. The officer. "You hear me?" the man asked. Arthur blinked slowly. The officer nodded. "Good. Stay with me." The ambulance doors slammed shut. And just like that, the storm was gone, replaced by a different kind of chaos. Sirens screamed. The vehicle lurched forward. Inside, everything moved fast. Gloves snapped. Equipment rattled. A paramedic leaned over him, checking vitals, adjusting something tight around his arm. "Severe hypothermia," she said. "Core temps dangerously low." Arthur shivered uncontrollably now, his body shaking so hard it felt like it might break apart. "That's good," the officer said from beside him. The paramedic glanced up. "Good. It means he's still fighting." Arthur heard the words, but they felt distant. Fighting. Was he? His eyes drifted shut again. "No, hey." The officer's voice cut in instantly. A firm hand pressed lightly against his shoulder. "Stay with me. What's your name?" Arthur hesitated. The question seemed simple, but suddenly it wasn't. His name. It echoed in his mind, tangled with everything that had just happened. The accusation, the door, the silence. Arthur Bennett. A father. A man who had just been thrown away. His lips parted. "Arthur," he whispered. The officer nodded. "Arthur. Good. I'm Daniel. You're not alone, okay?" Not alone. The words hit differently. For the first time since the door slammed behind him, someone was speaking to him like he mattered. Arthur's breathing steadied, just slightly. But then another thought crept in. Emily. His daughter. His chest tightened again, not from the cold this time, but from something deeper. She didn't, he tried to say, his voice barely audible. Daniel leaned closer. Didn't what? Arthur swallowed, his throat dry and raw. Didn't stop him. The words broke. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just broken. Daniel didn't respond right away. He didn't offer empty comfort or quick reassurances. He just looked at Arthur, really looked at him. And in that silence, he understood enough. "Right now," Daniel said quietly, "your only job is to stay alive." Arthur's eyes flickered. Stay alive. It sounded simple, but everything inside him felt tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of proving. Tired of believing in people who didn't believe in him. The ambulance hit a bump, jolting his body. Pain shot through him again, sharper this time. His fingers twitched beneath the blanket. Still there. Still alive. "Okay," he whispered. Daniel gave a small nod. "That's it." The sirens wailed louder as they approached the hospital. Lights flashed through the windows. Red, white, like a pulse dragging him forward. Arthur stared at the ceiling. His thoughts slowed. Not peaceful this time, but clearer. If he had died out there, that would have been the end of his story. Not just his life. His story. And it would have ended with betrayal. With silence. With a door closing behind him. Arthur's jaw tightened slightly. No. Something shifted. Small. Fragile. But real. The ambulance slowed. "Almost there," the paramedic called out. Arthur took a weak breath. It burned. But he held on to it. Because for the first time since the storm began, he wasn't just surviving. He was choosing to. And somewhere deep inside, without fully realizing it yet, Arthur Bennett had just taken the first step toward becoming someone new. The hospital didn't feel warm. Not really. It was bright, sterile, filled with the constant hum of machines and distant voices echoing through long hallways. But for Arthur Bennett, lying on that narrow bed under thin blankets, the cold hadn't fully left his body. It lingered, deep in his bones. "Easy, you're okay," a nurse said gently, adjusting the four in his arm. "You're at St. Mary's. You made it." Made it. Arthur stared at the ceiling, blinking slowly as the words settled in. He was alive. Barely, but alive. His body ached in ways he couldn't fully describe. His fingers burned as warmth slowly returned, sharp and painful, like thousands of tiny needles under his skin. His chest felt tight, his throat raw, but none of that compared to the weight pressing on his heart. He turned his head slightly. A chair sat beside the bed. Occupied. Officer Daniel Reyes leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped loosely. His jacket was gone now, replaced by a simple dark shirt, but the exhaustion on his face hadn't changed. He had stayed. Arthur frowned faintly. "You're still here?" Daniel looked up, a small, almost relieved smile crossing his face. "Yeah. Figured I'd make sure you didn't try to escape again." Arthur let out the faintest breath of a laugh, more air than sound. "I don't think I'm going anywhere," he murmured. Daniel nodded. "Good." Silence settled between them for a moment. Not uncomfortable, just quiet. Real. Arthur shifted slightly, wincing. "How long?" "Few hours," Daniel said. "You were in rough shape. Doc said another 30 minutes out there." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Arthur understood. Another 30 minutes, and none of this would matter. No hospital. No second chance. Nothing. Arthur swallowed slowly. "You found me." "Yeah." "Why?" The question hung in the air. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "What do you mean, why?" Arthur's gaze drifted toward the window. Snow still fell outside, softer now, quieter. "People don't usually stop," he said. "Not anymore." Daniel leaned back slightly, considering that. "I wasn't looking for you," he admitted. "Got a call about a stalled car a few blocks over. Took a wrong turn." Arthur turned his head back toward him. "A wrong turn," he repeated softly. Daniel gave a small shrug. "Guess it wasn't wrong." Something about that stayed with Arthur. A mistake. A coincidence. Or maybe something else. Arthur closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. "You saved my life." Daniel didn't respond right away. Then, simply, "You did that part yourself." Arthur frowned faintly. "You were still breathing," Daniel continued. "Still fighting. I just showed up." Arthur looked at him, really looked this time. There was no arrogance. No need for credit. Just truth. And for some reason, that hit harder than anything else. "Thank you," Arthur said quietly. Daniel nodded once. "You're welcome." Another silence. Then, "Do you have anyone we can call?" Daniel asked gently. "Family? Friends?" The question landed like a weight. Arthur's chest tightened. He thought of Emily. Her face. Her hesitation. Her silence. The door. Slowly he shook his head. "No," he said. It wasn't just an answer. It was a realization. Daniel studied him for a moment, but didn't push. "All right," he said. "We'll figure something out." Arthur let out a slow breath. "Figure something out," he echoed. For 75 years, he had been the one who figured things out. The one people relied on. The one who fixed problems, paid bills, made sure everything held together. And now, he had nothing. No home. No family. No place to return to when he left this bed. The thought should have terrified him. But instead, it felt strangely clear. Like standing at the edge of something unknown. Arthur shifted slightly, staring at his hands. They looked older than he remembered. Thinner. Weaker. But still his. Still capable. "Officer," he began, then paused. "Daniel," he corrected. Arthur nodded. "Daniel." He took a breath. If someone loses everything," he said slowly, choosing each word, "what are they supposed to do?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms slightly, eyes thoughtful. Then he said, "Start with what's left." Arthur frowned. "What's left?" Daniel gestured lightly toward him. "You're still here." Arthur let that sink in. Still here. Not gone. Not erased. Not finished. Daniel continued, his voice steady. "That's more than a lot of people get." Arthur looked down again. For the first time since the storm, he didn't feel like a victim. Not completely. Something small. "I had a life," he said, more to himself than to Daniel. I had a name that meant something. Daniel nodded. You still do. Arthur shook his head slowly. No, he said. That name. He paused, the weight of it settling in his chest. That name belongs to someone else now. Daniel frowned slightly. What do you mean? Arthur looked up, and for the first time, there was something different in his eyes. Not just pain. Decision. If I walk out of here as Arthur Bennett, he said slowly, then I'm walking back into everything that broke me. Daniel stayed quiet, listening. Arthur continued, his voice steady now. That name is tied to a house I can't return to. A daughter who didn't choose me. A life that's already gone. The room felt still, heavy. But if I leave it behind, Arthur said, then maybe I'm not starting over. Daniel tilted his head slightly. What are you doing then? Arthur looked back at the window. The snow was gone. The sky was clear. I'm starting different. Silence. Then Daniel asked, what would you call yourself? Arthur didn't answer right away. He thought about everything he had lost. Everything that had been taken. Everything that had ended in that storm. And then, something new. Robert, he said finally. Daniel waited. Robert Hayes. The name felt unfamiliar on his tongue. But not wrong. Not broken. Clean. Untouched. Daniel studied him for a long moment. Then nodded slowly. All right, he said. Robert Hayes. Arthur. No. Robert let out a quiet breath. Something inside him shifted. Not healed. Not whole. But separated. Like he had stepped out of the wreckage of one life and into the beginning of another. A nurse entered shortly after with discharge papers, instructions, medications, signatures. Robert went through the motions quietly, his hand steady as he signed the name at the bottom. Not Arthur Bennett. Robert Hayes. When it was done, he stood up slowly. His legs were weak, but they held. Daniel grabbed a spare jacket from a chair nearby and handed it to him. You'll need this, he said. Robert took it. Thank you. They walked together toward the exit. Each step felt strange, not just because of his body, but because of what he was leaving behind. At the hospital doors, Daniel stopped. This is as far as I go, he said. Robert nodded. He understood. He turned toward the outside. Cold air greeted him again, but this time, it didn't feel like an enemy. Just reality. Hey, Daniel called. Robert looked back. If you ever need anything, Daniel said, you know where to find me. Robert held his gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod. I think, he said quietly, I need to find myself first. Daniel smiled faintly. Fair enough. Robert stepped outside. No storm, no chaos, just a quiet street and an uncertain path ahead. But this time, he wasn't being thrown out. He was walking forward. And Arthur Bennett was gone. The building didn't look like a place where lives began again. It looked like a place where they ended slowly. Robert Hayes stood across the street, hands buried deep in the borrowed jacket Daniel had given him, staring at the faded sign above the entrance. The letters were chipped, half-faded by time and weather. Community Support Center. A few people moved in and out of the doors, quiet, tired figures carrying plastic bags, worn backpacks, or nothing at all. No one laughed. No one lingered. They just went in, or came out. Robert swallowed. For 75 years, he had walked into places with purpose. Jobs, homes, stores where people greeted him by name, spaces where he belonged. This wasn't one of those places. This was where people went when they had nowhere else left. His grip tightened inside his pockets. You're still here, he muttered to himself. That was what Daniel said. Still here. Robert exhaled slowly, then stepped forward. The doors opened with a dull creak. Warm air hit his face. Not comforting, just different from the cold outside. The smell followed next. A mix of disinfectant, old fabric, and something faintly sour that lingered in the walls. Inside, the room buzzed with low noise. Conversations, coughs, the scrape of chairs, the quiet chaos of survival. A woman behind a worn front desk looked up as he approached. First time? She asked, her voice neutral, not unkind, but not soft either. Robert hesitated, then nodded. She slid a clipboard toward him. Fill this out. Name, age, any medical needs. We'll get you set up. Robert stared at the paper. Name. His hand hovered over the pen. For a split second, Arthur Bennett tried to come back. The life, the identity, the man he had been for decades. Then he remembered the door, the storm, the silence. His grip steadied. Robert Hayes. He wrote it carefully, like it mattered, because now it did. All right, Robert. The The woman said after a quick glance. We've got a cot in the back. Meals are served twice a day. Lights out at 10. That was it. No welcome. No questions. Just instructions. Robert nodded. Thank you. He walked past the desk, deeper into the building. Rows of cots filled the large room, lined up with little space between them. Some were occupied, people sitting, lying down, staring at nothing. Others were empty, thin blankets folded at the edge. This was it. This was where he would sleep. Robert moved slowly, taking it in. A man coughed violently in the corner. Another muttered to himself, pacing in tight circles. A woman sat on the edge of her cot, clutching a photograph like it was the last thing she owned. No one looked at him. No one cared that he was new, because everyone here had their own story, their own fall, their own storm. Robert found the cot with his name scribbled on a small piece of paper. He sat down. The frame creaked under his weight. The mattress was thin, uneven, but it held. For a long moment, he just sat there, not moving, not thinking, just existing. Then the noise around him crept back in. The coughs, the whispers, the restless shifting of people who couldn't quite relax. Robert leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. This is it, he murmured. Not as a complaint. As a fact. This was the bottom. No house. No family. No past to return to. Just this room. And the man he had chosen to become. Robert glanced down at his hands. They were still steady. Still capable. Still his. Across the room, an older man struggled to lift a bag onto his cot. His hands shook badly, the weight too much for him. For a moment, Robert just watched. He could ignore it. No one else was helping. No one expected him to. This place didn't run on kindness. It ran on survival. Robert looked away, then paused. Something in his chest tightened. Not pain. Something else. A memory of who he used to be before everything broke. He exhaled sharply, pushed himself up from the cot, and walked over. Here, he said quietly, reaching for the bag. The man looked up, surprised. Robert lifted it easily and set it down. The man blinked. Thanks. Robert nodded once. It's nothing. But it wasn't. Not really. Because as he turned and walked back to his cot, something small had changed. Not the room. Not his situation. But him. He sat down again, staring ahead. For the first time since he stepped inside. He didn't feel completely invisible. The noise around him didn't fade. The reality didn't soften. But there was something else now. A flicker. A beginning. Robert leaned back slowly, the thin mattress pressing against his back. The ceiling above him was cracked, stained with age. Imperfect, but still standing, just like him. And somewhere, deep beneath the exhaustion and loss, a quiet thought formed. If this was the bottom, then the only direction left was up. The first night was the hardest. Not because of the cold, not because of the noise, but because of the silence inside his own head. Robert Hayes lay on the thin cot, staring up at the cracked ceiling, listening to the restless sounds around him. Someone coughed every few seconds. Another man snored unevenly. Somewhere in the room, a quiet argument started, then faded just as quickly. Sleep didn't come. It hovered just out of reach. Every time Robert closed his eyes, something pulled him back. The door slamming. Emily standing there, saying nothing. He turned slightly on the cot, the springs creaking under him. Doesn't matter, he whispered to himself. But it did. It still did. He exhaled slowly and sat up. Around him, most people had settled into uneasy sleep. The lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across the room. Robert rubbed his hands together, feeling the stiffness in his fingers. He wasn't used to being still. Not like this. For most of his life, he had worked with his hands. Fixing things. Building things. Solving problems. Now, there was nothing to fix. Or at least, that's what he thought. A faint metallic clatter broke the quiet. Robert turned his head. Near the far wall, a maintenance cart sat half open. Tools scattered loosely across the top. Screwdrivers, a wrench, a loose panel leaning against it. And beside it, a flickering light. It buzzed softly, blinking on and off in an uneven rhythm. Robert stared at it. On, off, on, off. Annoying. Unstable. Wrong. He frowned slightly. That kind of thing used to bother him. Still did. He glanced around. No one else seemed to care. Of course they didn't. They had bigger problems. Robert looked back at the light. On. Off. On. He swung his legs off the cot. Just take a look, he muttered. Not because anyone asked. Not because it mattered, just because he could. He walked over slowly, careful not to wake anyone, and stopped in front of the panel. The wiring was exposed. Messy, poorly secured. Whoever fixed it last didn't finish the job. Robert crouched down, picking up a screwdriver from the cart. His fingers adjusted instinctively, muscle memory kicking in despite the stiffness. Yeah, that's not right, he murmured. He leaned closer, examining the connection. Loose contact. That was all. Simple. Fixable. He tightened the screw carefully, then adjusted the wire, pressing it firmly into place. The light flickered once, twice. Then, steady. No buzz. No blinking. Just a soft, constant glow. Robert froze for a second. Not because it was difficult, but Carl dropped into the chair across from him, setting his tray down with a soft clatter. They ate in silence for a moment. Then Carl said, "Light's still working." Robert glanced over. "Yeah." Carl smirked slightly. "You got skills like that, you won't stay stuck here long." Robert didn't respond right away, because that word, stuck, hit something inside him. "I'm not trying to get out fast," he said finally. Carl raised an eyebrow. "No." Robert shook his head. "Not like before." Carl leaned back slightly. "Before what?" Robert looked down at his hands. "Before I lost everything." Carl didn't ask more. He didn't need to. Instead, he nodded once. "Fair enough." They finished eating, and Carl stood up first. "If you're looking for something to do, staff's always dealing with broken stuff around here." Robert looked up. Carl jerked his head toward the back hallway. "They don't have the budget to fix half of it, so it just stays broken." Then he walked off. Robert sat there for a moment longer. Something to do. That was new. Not survival. Not just getting through the day, but doing. He stood up. The back hallway was quieter. Narrow. Dimly lit. The kind of place people passed through, not stayed in. A staff member struggled with a cart near the storage room. One wheel was stuck, dragging unevenly across the floor. Robert stopped, watched for a second, then stepped forward. "Wheels misaligned," he said. The staff member looked up, surprised. "What?" Robert crouched down, inspecting it. "Axles bent slightly. It's catching." The staff member blinked. "You know how to fix that?" Robert didn't answer. He just reached down, adjusted the wheel, applied pressure at the right angle, then gave it a firm push. The cart rolled forward. Smooth. No drag. No resistance. The staff member stared. "How did you?" "Simple fix," Robert said, standing up. The man shook his head, half smiling. "We've been dealing with that thing for weeks." Robert shrugged. "You just needed the right angle." The staff member looked at him more carefully now. "You looking for work or something?" Robert hesitated. Work. The word felt distant, but not impossible. "I'm just helping," he said. The man nodded slowly. "Well, we could use that." Robert gave a small nod and moved on. Further down the hall, a door hung slightly off its hinge. He fixed it. In the main room, a loose table leg wobbled every time someone leaned on it. He stabilized it. A sink in the restroom dripped constantly, steady, annoying. He tightened it. One by one. Small things. Easy things. But things no one else had done. And with each fix, something inside him grew quieter. Clearer. By midday, people started noticing. "That was you?" someone asked, tapping the now stable table. Robert nodded. A woman nearby looked at him with something unfamiliar in this place. "Respect." "Thank you," she said softly. Robert paused. That word. It had been a long time since he heard it and believed it. "You're welcome," he replied. Carl walked by later, glanced around, then smirked. "You've been busy." Robert exhaled lightly. "Just fixing what I can." Carl nodded toward the room. "You see that?" Robert followed his gaze. People sitting a little easier. Less frustration. Less tension. "Yeah," Robert said. Carl looked back at him. "That's not nothing." Robert didn't answer, but he felt it. For the first time since he walked into this place, he wasn't just another person trying to survive. He was someone who made things better, even in small ways. Especially in small ways. That night, as he sat on his cot again, the room felt different. Not brighter, not easier, but lighter. Robert leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He had no money, no home, no certainty about tomorrow. But he had something else now. A purpose. Not big, not loud, but real. And for the first time since he became Robert Hayes, he wasn't just rebuilding his life. He was beginning to understand why it was worth rebuilding at all. It didn't happen all at once. There was no big moment, no announcement, No turning point that everyone could point to and say, asterisk, that's when it began, asterisk. It started quietly, like most real things do. Robert Hayes was in the back room again, tightening a loose hinge on a cabinet that had been slamming shut for months. The metal groaned slightly as he adjusted it, then settled into place with a soft, controlled click. Better. Behind him, two women sat at a small table. They spoke in low voices, careful, guarded, like people who weren't used to being heard. I just don't know where to go after this, one of them said. Her voice trembled. They said I can't stay here forever. You won't, the other replied. They always say that. But I don't have anyone. The words hung in the air. Robert paused. He didn't turn around. But he listened. I had a place once, the first woman continued. A house. My husband built it. After he passed, everything just slipped away. Robert's hand tightened slightly on the screwdriver. That sentence. It felt familiar. Too familiar. I'm tired, she whispered. I'm just so tired of starting over. Silence followed. Heavy. Real. Robert slowly stood up. For a moment, he considered walking away. This wasn't his business. This wasn't something he could fix with a tool or a steady hand. But something inside him didn't let him leave. He turned. The two women looked up, surprised. Sorry, Robert said quietly. Didn't mean to interrupt. It's okay, one of them replied, wiping her eyes quickly, embarrassed. Robert nodded, then hesitated. He wasn't good with words. Never had been. But this mattered. You're not the only one starting over, he said. The woman looked at him, confused. What? Robert gestured lightly around the room. Most people here, they lost something. A home. A family. A life. He paused. I did too. The women exchanged a glance. Something shifted. Not sympathy. Recognition. What happened? The second woman asked gently. Robert didn't go into details. He didn't talk about the storm, the accusation, the door. He just said, I ran out of places to go. The first woman nodded slowly. Yeah, she whispered. That sounds about right. Robert looked at them both. Then, after a moment, he said something he hadn't planned. What if you didn't have to figure it out alone? They frowned slightly. What do you mean? One asked. Robert leaned against the table, thinking as he spoke. There are a lot of people here, he said. People who know things. Who've done things. People who've lived whole lives before ending up here. He glanced around the room. Carl fixing a chair in the corner. A woman folding clothes neatly. Someone quietly helping another read a form. We're not empty, Robert continued. We're just disconnected. The first woman tilted her head. So what are you saying? Robert took a breath. I'm saying maybe we don't need to wait for someone else to fix things, he said. Maybe we start small. Help each other. Silence. They were listening now. Really listening. How? The second woman asked. Robert thought for a second, then said, What do you need right now? The first woman hesitated. I don't even know where to begin. Then we start there, Robert said. One thing at a time. The second woman leaned forward slightly. And you'd help with that? Robert nodded once. Yeah. Not as a promise. As a decision. Carl's voice cut in from across the room. Careful, Robert. They all turned. Carl smirked, arms crossed. You keep doing that, you're going to end up running this place. A few people nearby chuckled softly. But Robert didn't smile. Because something about that didn't feel like a joke. He looked back at the two women. We don't need to run anything, he said. We just need to build something that works. The first woman blinked. Build what? Robert paused, then said the words slowly. Something that connects people. The room felt quieter. Focused. What would you call it? She asked. Robert didn't answer right away. He thought about everything he had seen here. Loneliness. Fear. People drifting through life with nothing to hold on to. Then he thought about what had helped him survive. One person. One moment. One connection. He looked up. Friendly Bridges, he said. The name sounded simple, but it felt right. The second woman smiled faintly. Bridges. Robert nodded. Between people who need help and people who can give it. Carl walked over, shaking his head slightly. You're serious? Robert met his gaze. Yeah. Carl studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. Well, he said, guess I'm in. The two women exchanged a look, then nodded. Me too, one of them said. Robert looked around. Nothing had changed. Same room, same people, same problems. But something had started. Not loud, not official, but real. A few people, a simple idea, and a man who had lost everything. Now building something new. Not for himself, but for others just like him. The first sign that something was wrong didn't come from the shelter. It came from the outside world. Robert Hayes was standing near the front desk, helping organize a stack of donated supplies, when the television mounted high on the wall flickered to life. No one paid attention at first. The TV was always on, background noise, something to fill the silence. News, weather, headlines that didn't seem to matter to people who were already struggling just to get through the day. But then, breaking news. The words cut through the room. A few heads turned. Then more. Robert didn't look up immediately. He was focused on aligning the boxes, making sure things were steady, balanced, simple, controlled. But the tone of the reporter's voice shifted. Urgent, sharp, and something about it pulled his attention. Authorities have confirmed an ongoing investigation into financial fraud linked to multiple accounts during the pandemic. Robert froze, just slightly. Sources say several individuals are involved in a scheme that includes falsified accusations and illegal transfers. Now he looked. The screen showed flashing lights. Police cars. A house. Familiar. Too familiar. Robert stepped closer. One of the primary suspects, Mark Collins, has been taken into custody earlier this morning. The name hit like a quiet explosion. Mark. The room around him faded. Charged with fraud, embezzlement, and filing false reports against a family member in an attempt to conceal financial activity. A family member. Robert's jaw tightened. The footage shifted, Mark being led away in handcuffs, his face pale, his usual confidence gone. Gone. Just like that. Someone in the room muttered, "Damn." Another shook their head. People really out here doing anything these days. But Robert didn't hear them. He was still watching. Investigators revealed that the accusations made against the elderly victim were completely fabricated. Fabricated. Used as a diversion to cover up stolen funds during the height of the pandemic. The words echoed. Not loud, but deep. Robert felt something rise in his chest. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Something heavier. Truth. Finally, visible. Carl stepped up beside him. "You know that guy?" Robert didn't answer right away. He watched as Mark was pushed into the back of a police car. The door slammed. Just like that night. Just like the moment everything ended. Except this time. Mark was the one on the outside. Robert exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know him." Carl glanced at him, then back at the screen. "Looks like he's done." Maybe. But that wasn't what stayed with Robert. It wasn't the arrest. It wasn't the charges. It was what came next. Authorities are continuing to investigate related parties, including those who may have unknowingly supported or defended the suspect. The footage changed. And then, Emily, standing outside the same house. Reporters surrounding her. Microphones pushed forward. Her face, pale, shaken, nothing like the woman who stood silent at the door that night. "Did you know about the false accusations?" a reporter asked. "No," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't know. Do you have anything to say to your father?" The question hung. Heavy. Unavoidable. Emily hesitated. Her lips parted. Then closed. Her eyes filled with tears. I made a mistake," she whispered. Robert's chest tightened. Carl glanced at him again, more carefully this time. "You all right?" he asked. Robert didn't respond. Because in that moment, he wasn't in the shelter anymore. He was back in that living room, watching her choose silence, watching the door close, watching everything break. But now, the truth was out. The world knew. Mark's lies, his manipulation, the accusation that destroyed everything. Gone. Replaced by reality. Robert turned away from the screen. Not because he couldn't watch, but because he didn't need to anymore. He already knew what came next. Regret. Apologies. Maybe even someone coming to find him. Carl crossed his arms. "That your family?" Robert paused, then nodded once. Carl exhaled. "You gonna go back?" The question sat between them. Simple, but loaded with everything Robert had built since that night. The shelter. The people. Friendly bridges. The quiet purpose that had started to grow. Robert looked around. At the room. At the people who now nodded at him when he passed. At the small things that were beginning to connect. Then he looked back at the screen. Emily still stood there. Lost. Broken. But real. Just like him. Robert took a slow breath. "I don't know," he said. And for the first time, that answer wasn't weakness. It was honesty. Because this time, he wasn't the man being pushed out. He was the man who got to choose. What came next? The knock came just after sunset. Soft. uncertain, like whoever stood on the other side wasn't sure they had the right to be there. Robert Hayes looked up from the table where he sat. A few sheets of paper spread out in front of him. Names, small notes, simple connections forming the early structure of friendly bridges. Carl glanced toward the door. You expecting someone? Robert shook his head. No. The knock came again, slightly louder this time. The room quieted. Not completely, but enough. Robert stood slowly. Something in his chest tightened. Not fear, not exactly. Recognition. He walked toward the door, each step measured, steady. When he reached it, his hand paused on the handle. For a second, just a second, he thought about not opening it, about leaving the past where it belonged. But then, he turned the handle. The door opened, and there she was. Dad. Emily's voice broke on the word. She looked smaller than he remembered. Not physically, but something in her posture, the way her shoulders curved inward, like she was trying to hold herself together. Her eyes were red, swollen. She hadn't slept. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other. The distance between them wasn't measured in steps. It was measured in everything that had happened since that night. Robert didn't say her name. Not yet. Emily swallowed hard. I didn't know where else to go. Robert's expression didn't change. But inside, something shifted. Not anger. Not forgiveness. Just wait. Carl stepped quietly out of view, giving them space. Emily took a small step forward, then stopped, like she wasn't sure she was allowed any closer. I saw the news, she said. Everything came out. Robert nodded once. It did. Her lips trembled. He lied. About all of it. The money. The accusations. Everything. I know. The words were calm. Too calm. And that made it worse. Emily's eyes filled again. I should have believed you. Silence. Robert looked at her. Really looked this time. Not the daughter he remembered. Not the child who used to hold his hand. But the person standing in front of him now. Someone who had made a choice. And had to live with it. I asked you to trust me, he said quietly. Emily nodded quickly. I know you did. And you didn't. The truth landed between them. Sharp. Unavoidable. Emily took another step forward. I was scared, she said. Everything was falling apart. And he sounded so sure. I didn't know what to believe. Robert didn't interrupt. I thought, she continued, her voice cracking. I thought maybe you were hiding something. Just for a moment. And that moment, she shook her head. It cost everything. Robert exhaled slowly. That moment, he said, was all it took. Tears slipped down her face. I know. She wiped them away quickly, but more came. I've replayed it over and over, she whispered. The way you looked at me. The way I didn't say anything. Her voice broke completely now. I didn't stop him. The same words he had said in the ambulance. Now, coming back to him. From her. Robert's jaw tightened slightly. Because hearing it now didn't feel the same. Before it was pain. Now, it was truth. Emily took a shaky breath. I don't expect you to forgive me. Robert stayed silent. I don't even expect you to let me stay, she added. I needed to find you. To tell you that I was wrong. She hesitated. Then said the word she had been holding back. I'm sorry, Dad. The word hung in the air. Dad. For a moment, Robert didn't respond. Because something inside him resisted. That name. That role. It belonged to a life that had ended. Didn't it? He looked past her briefly. The street behind her was quiet. Cold, but not like before. Not the same storm. Not the same man. Then he looked back at her. At the fear. The regret. The honesty. And something else. Hope. Fragile. But there. You came all this way, he said slowly. Emily nodded. I had to. Why? The question caught her off guard. She blinked. Because you're my father. Robert held her gaze. For a long moment. Then he said quietly. That didn't stop you before. Emily flinched. Not from anger. From truth. I know, she whispered. Silence settled again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was full of everything unsaid. Everything broken. Everything that might still be repaired. Robert glanced back into the shelter. At the people inside. At the place he had started to build something new. Then back at Emily. Standing at the edge of it. Not part of this world. But not completely outside it either. You can come in, he said finally. Emily looked up, surprised. Really? Robert stepped aside. Not wide. Just enough. This isn't my house, he added. But you can come in. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it wasn't rejection either. Emily stepped forward slowly. Carefully. Like she was walking into something fragile. As she passed him, she hesitated. "Thank you," she said softly. Robert didn't answer. He closed the door behind her. And for the first time since that night, they stood on the same side of it. Emily didn't say much after she stepped inside. She stood just past the doorway, taking in the room, the rows of cots, the worn walls, the quiet movement of people who had nowhere else to go. This wasn't the life she had imagined for her father. And now she understood why. Robert didn't rush to fill the silence. He walked back to the table and sat down, returning to the papers in front of him. Names, notes, small connections that, together, were starting to become something real. Emily followed slowly. "What is all this?" she asked, her voice softer now. Robert didn't look up right away. "People," he said. She frowned slightly. "People. Who they are. What they need. What they can offer." He finally looked at her. "It's called Friendly Bridges." Emily repeated it quietly. "Friendly Bridges." Robert nodded. "It's not a program. Not really. It's just people helping each other, filling in the gaps where life falls apart." Emily glanced around again. She noticed things she hadn't before. A man carefully fixing a chair leg. A woman helping another fill out paperwork. Carl showing someone how to use a phone. Small things, but intentional. "This is what you've been doing?" she asked. Robert nodded once. "Since I got here." Emily's eyes softened. "You built this?" Robert shook his head. "No, I just started it. Everyone else is building it." She looked at him differently now. Not with guilt. Not just with regret. But with something else. Respect. "I didn't know," she said quietly. Robert gave a small, almost distant smile. "There's a lot you didn't know." The words weren't cruel, but they were honest. Emily lowered her gaze. "I want to understand," she said. Robert studied her for a moment, then asked why. She hesitated, then answered truthfully. "Because I don't want to lose you again." The room felt still. Robert leaned back slightly in his chair. "You already did," he said. Emily flinched, but she didn't look away this time. "I know," she whispered. "And I can't go back," Robert continued. "Not to who I was. Not to that life." Emily nodded slowly. "I'm not asking you to." Robert watched her carefully. She continued, her voice shaking slightly. "I just want a chance to be part of who you are now." That landed differently. Not as a demand. Not as an expectation. But as a request. Robert looked down at the papers again. At the names. At the people who now depended on him. Not in a grand way, but in small, real ways that mattered. Then he looked back at Emily. "This place," he said, "it's not easy." "I know." "No." Robert shook his head slightly. "You don't. Not yet." Emily held his gaze. "Then let me learn." Silence. Long. Heavy. But not closed. Finally, Robert nodded once. "All right," he said. Emily blinked. "Really? You can stay," he added. "Help. See what this is." Her eyes filled again, but this time, not from pain. From something closer to relief. "Thank you," she said. Robert didn't respond with words. But he didn't take it back either. Over the next few days, things didn't magically fix themselves. There were no sudden transformations. No perfect reconciliation. Emily struggled. The work was unfamiliar. The environment uncomfortable. The reality overwhelming. But she stayed. She listened. She helped. And slowly, very slowly, she began to understand the man her father had become. Not the one she remembered, but the one who had rebuilt himself from nothing. One afternoon, as they worked side by side organizing supplies, Emily paused. "Dad," she said. Robert glanced at her. She hesitated, then asked, "How did you do it?" "Do what?" "Start over," she said. "After everything." Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I didn't." Emily frowned slightly. "I didn't start over," he continued. "I started forward." She let that sink in. Forward. Not back. Not trying to rebuild what was lost, but building something new. That night, as the shelter settled into its usual rhythm, Robert stood near the window. The sky was clear. No storm. Just quiet. Emily stood beside him. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to, because some things didn't require words anymore. After a while, Robert said softly, "They tried to end my life in that storm." Emily looked at him. "But all they really did," he continued, "was give me a reason to build a better one." Emily's eyes filled again, but she smiled through it. And for the first time since everything broke, it didn't feel like the end of a story. It felt like the beginning of something worth telling. Robert looked out into the night. At the calm. At the stillness. At the life he had rebuilt. Not alone, but with purpose. And he realized something simple. It wasn't too late. It never had been. Because sometimes, losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters. And sometimes, the strongest bridges are the ones built after everything falls apart. So tell me, if life took everything from you tomorrow, would you have the strength to build something new?